Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 11-game NFL slate for you for Monday or for Sunday rather. This starts at 1 o'clock Eastern on Sunday, so let's get into this slate. Before I get started, you need to smash that like and subscribe button. Also, check out the links in the description for Discord and YouTube members. Really do appreciate all the guys that are in there. Also in the YouTube members as well. We got several people in there. That's really cool. And just join Discord below. You don't have to pay for anything. You can join Discord, and there's a lot of cool people in there. So let's go ahead and check that out. Let's go ahead and get into the slate, though. Let's start with our quarterbacks here. So we're going to start with Jalen Hurts for the Eagles. Now, he is facing the Jets. This is a little bit of a tough matchup for him, but he's been basically matchup proof to start the season. He's had a really solid week after week. He hasn't thrown a ton of touchdowns yet, but he is getting the touchdowns on the ground as well, which is kind of boosting his fantasy output. Obviously, he's the most expensive quarterback on the slate, but he's a very good one for the reason that he's just very capable of having a really big day. Tua Tagovailoa is also having a great season so far. He's throwing some more touchdowns than Jalen is, and he's actually got a pretty good matchup here against Carolina. I really do like his upside in this one, despite the fact that Carolina has been a little bit decent against the pass. I think he's kind of matchup proof too. He's been really good this season. New England's really the only team that's, and Buffalo kind of slowed him down a little bit, but overall he's really solid and has nice upside on the slate. Then we'll look at Kirk Cousins from Minnesota. He's featuring a nice game here against Chicago. He's had at least 2 touchdowns in every game this year. He hasn't had the fantasy output that Jalen has or Tua has, but he is capable of that, and he's got a lot of touchdowns and a lot of upside. The yards have been pretty high as well in several of these games. I think this will be a high yard game as well. Then we'll look at Trevor Lawrence for Jacksonville. I really think he's undervalued so far this season. He's been a little bit inconsistent, but his price is pretty good here, and he's got a really good matchup here against Indianapolis, who really haven't been able to stop anybody through there, and he's got really nice upside as a result of that. He's also been running the ball pretty good, though he doesn't have a touchdown on the ground yet. He is capable of that, and so he is a very viable option on this slate, especially with his upside. Then we'll look at Matt Stafford for the Rams. He's got a good matchup here against Arizona. Arizona's also not been able to do much against anybody, and he's had a pretty solid season, though he has only broken 20 fantasy points once so far, and that was against Indianapolis. I do think he'll do it again today on this slate, and he'll hopefully get a couple of touchdowns as well. Then we'll look at our running backs here, and obviously Christian McCaffrey's having an absolutely insane season with touchdowns in every game. He's also got gigantic upside, obviously making him the most expensive running back on the slate. I do expect they're going to try to get him a touchdown. However, this is a tough matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland's defense is legitimate, and so he is definitely capable of a good game here, but he definitely has a tough matchup. Bijan Robinson has been really good without the touchdowns on the ground, though he does have a couple touchdowns in the air, which he's actually been boosting his fantasy output with his catching ability. But he's got really good upside in this matchup, and he's got a very good matchup perspective here. He's probably my favorite running back on the slate in general. Then we'll look at Josh Jacobs for Las Vegas. Now, he's been inconsistent this year, but he does have some nice upside. In the last few weeks, he's really improved. If he can get some more passes through the air, too, that gives him a little bit of an advantage. So he's been getting at least 5 catches in 4 of the 5 games so far. So he's got really nice upside as well on this slate. Kamara has hit the ground running as a running back in his first 2 games. The first 2 games have been really solid. I think he'll continue to be good, and he'll get plenty of receptions as well in this one. New England has been one of the tougher defenses on the season, but he's got a nice matchup here against Houston, which is going to be a lot easier, and he's got a great opportunity for a big game here. He's also still a little bit too cheap. Kyren Williams for the Rams also in play. He's got a great matchup here. I look for him to have a big game. He's had a couple big games so far this season. He's been somewhat inconsistent, but he is capable of a big one here, and he's got all the matchup situations in his favor. Must start for Miami. He's going to have some upside in this one with injuries to Ekane. He's going to have plenty of opportunity to be the lead back. He started the season kind of as a lead back, but Ekane kind of took over. But it looked like Mostert is still going to have really good upside. He's had some big games just the same, and so he's definitely capable of a solid one here. Then we'll look at Mixon for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, he's been inconsistent this year, but he does have 10-plus fantasy point upside. He's nice and cheap. That gives him some utility. And he's going to get more rushes now. I think they finally realized that they got to be more balanced the last couple of weeks. And so that should help him get more yards and attempts. Then we'll look at Swift for Philly. Now, he's obviously not a guy that gets a ton of touches sometimes, but he is capable. He's had a couple good reception games, the last couple games as well, which have boosted his stats. If he can squeeze in a touchdown somewhere, then he'll definitely pay off here. But that's somewhat, sometimes not always a thing, and that's why his price is still low. For Madison, for the Vikings, he's been somewhat inconsistent this year, but he definitely has some capability, and he's been getting some passes through the air as well, which gives him some utility at a low price. Maybe in our wide receivers, it's going to get a little bit crazy here. We got a lot of different guys, but we'll start with Tyreek Hill. Obviously, he's having a monster season with 36 receptions and 650 yards. He's had some really big games, though. He's had 2 lower-end games. For this price, he definitely needs to get in the 20s or high 20s, really. He is capable of that. He's going to get the targets, whether he gets the yards and touchdown or not is really the question here. And this is a tough matchup kind of in the air. Then we'll look at Cooper Kupp. Looks like this will be his second game back. In his first game, he got a lot of targets and he got a lot of yards. He is capable of another big game here, and he's got a nice favorable matchup. I don't think they're going to be able to do anything to stop him. Jamar Chase is finally getting all the targets that he probably should be getting for them to have a good chance to win. If you can look at the thing, in the 2 games that they've won, he's gotten over 15 targets. And I expect him to be heavily targeted again, especially against Seattle. And so I think he's going to be a great option on this slate. A.J. Brown for Philly is also in play, though he is somewhat inconsistent. He's high risk, high reward because he goes up and down, but he definitely has big time upside, and he's a little bit cheaper than some of the other guys. St. Brown for Detroit also in play here. He's been a little bit gimpy last few games, but and he didn't play the last one, but he is capable of a big game here. He's actually had 4 really good games. Even without having a touchdown, he manages to score decent fantasy points. He gets usually a pretty good amount of yards, and so I do like his upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at Calvin Ridley for Jacksonville. He has some really good matchup metrics here. I do like his potential, though he has been robust. If he can score a touchdown, he'll pay off. But he's not guaranteed that. But he's had some good games throughout the year. He's just been a little inconsistent. Olave is a guy I really like to target sometimes in certain matchups. And this is one of those matchups I do like him, despite it being somewhat tough. And the last 2 weeks have not been ideal. He's capable of getting plenty of targets, although I do wonder if Kamara coming back is hurting his targets a little bit. But he's very capable of a big game, and so his price is cheap enough that he's worth a look. Ayuk had a huge game to start the season, but he's facing a tough matchup here against Cleveland. Though he's had some good games this year, he's got some nice upside. He's just a little bit up and down guy, but he has capability. If he can score a touchdown, he can pay off here. He can at least get over 80 yards in this one. Then Deebo Samuel for San Francisco. Obviously another tough matchup, but he's very capable of good games. He's had a couple of really solid ones, though the targets have been inconsistent, but I think they're going to have to go to him a lot. And that kind of matchup with Ayuk and Samuel are going to be a benefit for San Francisco in this matchup. And then Garrett Wilson for the Jets. For the Jets to do anything, he's got to be involved. In the 3 games that they played where he got more involved and more yards, he scored really good fantasy points. The times where he didn't get as many receptions, he definitely didn't do as well. But he is capable of a 10 to 15 fantasy point game most of the time, so I think he's a viable option at a minimum price. Looking at our tight ends here, we'll look at T.J. Hawkinson for Minnesota. He's my favorite by far. He's getting a lot of targets right now, and he's facing a great matchup. Though he's been somewhat inconsistent from the fantasy perspective. If he can score a touchdown, he'll probably score quite a few fantasy points. George Kittle has been inconsistent for San Francisco, but I do look for San Francisco to go to him a lot in this one. I'm not thinking he's going to get 3 touchdowns again, but he should get some targets and have some utility here. Sometimes against the tougher defenses, he'll have more upside. Godart for Philly also in play. He's actually had some pretty solid games, especially the last one against the Rams. He's got another good game here against the Jets. He's been a little inconsistent on the season, but he's nice and cheap, and he can help you pay up for other positions. And then Ingram for Jacksonville is in play. He's had some good games this season, though he's been inconsistent. I don't think he'll have a huge game, but he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this season. He is capable of a good game here, though, because we got a very positive matchup. As for the defenses, the 49ers facing Cleveland, obviously an advantage with Cleveland's quarterback being out, and they've had a lot of interceptions so far this season, so I have them as a lot of upside. The Dolphins also look like a pretty good situation here. Though they haven't had the interceptions, they've had a lot of sacks, and that's given them some utility, and they're facing a very good matchup here against Carolina. The Eagles also in play against the Jets. The Jets' offense has been somewhat lethargic. Even though the Eagles haven't intercepted the ball a lot, they've got a lot of sacks, and they've had some defensive fumble recoveries, which give them some utility here. Their fantasy output is probably a little bit lower than some of the other teams available. And then Seahawks, they have some nice value upside against Cincinnati. They're very high risk, high reward here. They've had a couple of good games, but they've had 2 really bad games. And depending on which version Joe Burrow shows up, could make or break them. But, they could, if Joe Burrow has an awful game, they could end up being one of the highest scoring defenses on the slate. And then for the Texans, they are facing New Orleans, which can be a tough team to go up against, but they do have some nice upside as they're doing decent from the interception aspect, and they've actually scored a decent amount of fantasy points against some teams so far this year, but they are high risk, high reward, but they're dirt cheap. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.